Welcome to part 2 of the ultimate guide to Nina for astrophotography. So if you want to learn how to unleash the full potential of your astrophotography rig, Nina is free, open source software and one of the best ways to do that. And you'll be able to automate things to an extent that is absolutely incredible. And if you're using the ASI Air and you're looking to switch to Nina, I can promise you won't be disappointed, and this is the guide to help you do that. Now, I've already done a part 1 where I show you how to install Nina, all of the drivers you need for it, all of the prerequisites, do the initial configuration and setup, add a custom horizon, all of this kind of stuff. So you may want to check out part 1 first. I'll put the link up above and down in the description. But you can also jump in directly here as well if you already have your Nina instance properly configured and you just want to learn some more stuff. And in this particular part, what we're going to look at is calibration frames. So how I take my calibration frames in Nina, and we'll also look at the advanced scheduler. And that lets you control Nina to a very fine-grained extent and really completely automate everything about Nina and all of your flows. And of course, we'll look quickly at the framing wizard as well, because we'll use that to add our targets to the sequencer. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so I am in Nina, and you can see I'm on the equipment tab, and I have all of my equipment basically connected. You see my camera is connected, and I'm cooling my camera. Actually, I'll do it to minus 10 degrees Celsius, right? So just cooling my camera there, and that way I'll have it with the exact same settings that I use during my imaging nights as well. So you can see I have my gain of 80, my offset of 8, USB limit of 40, full resolution. This is exactly my parameters when I image. And I'm also putting it at the temperature that I typically image at, which is minus 10 degrees Celsius in winter, spring, and fall, and minus 5 degrees Celsius in summer. But here we're at minus 10. I also have connected my filter wheel, which will be important for flat frames. But if you're not using a filter wheel, if you're just using a filter drawer, for instance, you have a one-shot color camera, or you're using something like Hyperstar, I recommend actually doing something which would be to use a manual filter wheel from Nina. You always have it in this list, manual filter wheel, connect it, and you can actually set the filter names as usual in your options equipment in there, and that will let Nina actually tag each frame that it's taking with the correct filter. So you can just change your filter manually, let Nina that you have changed the filter, Nina will validate that, and then put that information in the frames it takes. That way, when you have taken flat frames and light frames with the same filter, they're properly tagged with the same filter, and therefore they will be matched automatically by stacking software like PixInsight. It's super convenient to have this in place. For me, I'm using a monochrome camera with an integrated filter wheel, which is the QHY Minicam 8, and integrated filters as well. So I don't need to use the manual filter wheel, but we have that available. So how would I take my calibration frames first? So I have actually an entire video on the topic of taking calibration frames, as well as which calibration frames you need for what type of camera. I'll put the link of that video up above and down in the description. If you really want to go in depth, I highly recommend that you check it out. I made that video in a way that it should be understandable even if you're a complete beginner to astrophotography. But for me, I'll just give you the essentials of how you can take your calibration frames in Nina. So let's start with the simplest frames, which are bias frames and dark frames. Right? So bias frames, they're very short exposures on your camera sensor that let you characterize basically the read noise fixed pattern of your sensor. And you have dark frames that are the same length as your light frames for exactly the same settings as well, just like the bias frames. And they're made to really remove the fixed pattern noise of the dark current that accumulates as you take a longer and longer exposure. For me, because the camera that I use does not have any amp glow, I just limit myself to bias frames, but the way to take bias frames and dark frames is exactly the same. You can do it via a sequencer, but because you can just take your bias frames, take your dark frames, and then reuse them over and over and over for months on end, I've never found it necessary to really automate the process. I do it kind of manually. That way I can keep full control and see if anything is going wrong. And what I do is I go to my imaging tab. I make sure that I can see the image, and my bias frames, typically I take them with 1 second exposures because I'm using a cooled camera, and a 1 second exposure at -10 Celsius and a 0.0001 second exposure at -10 Celsius, they're basically the same thing. That said, there are some cameras that have trouble with exposures under 1 second long, and so I prefer to just take my bias frames with 1 second. So I would take first one exposure just to see what's going on there. And you can see I have a proper dark frame. The dust cap on the telescope is on, and I also have an opaque filter on top of my camera here, so I have made sure to select that particular filter. So I have like a double way to make sure that I don't get any light leak into my sensor. And then, okay, seems to be fine. What I'll do is I'll simply select the loop option here, click on save, and I'll call my target name bias. Right? It's a very simple way. I don't try to overcomplexify things. I don't try to put them in a sequence. I just do it manually, and then I'll copy that to my processing PC and forget about it for the next year or so. So that's very easy. Or until I change the settings on my camera, and then I click on image, and then I just wait. Simple as that. And Nina will just save all of the images to the folder that we have defined here, which is under documents for my case. And you see, if we go to that folder, I have this bias folder inside, snapshot, and here are all of my bias frames that are being taken. Currently, 30 exposures. I typically like to have 50 exposures for whatever reason. It's more like psychological than anything else. So I just wait until I see something like 50 items, and then I stop it and I'm good. There it is, we have 50 items. I'll just stop it, and I've taken, just like that, my bias frames. If I wanted to take dark frames, let's say that I do some narrowband imaging and I need to have 300-second dark frames. And I haven't used dark frames for years now, but I would just put bias, not dark in there, and just do it again, loop and save, and then come back later when I'm free. I don't put any limit, because then it's like I'm just taking dark frames until I remember that I'm taking dark frames. And I can do that on cloudy nights without any issues. My rig is always ready, and that's it. Very easy, very straightforward, and I just come back and look at how many frames I have, and that's it. So that's for taking this kind of images with Nina. You have the ability to use those loop and save features in there in the imaging tab. So now we have dark frames, we have bias frames. What about the one everybody loves, which is flat frames? So for flat frames, we have the Flat Wizard. And the Flat Wizard in Nina is absolutely amazing because it can do everything automatically, even if you have multiple filters like I do with my filter wheel and monochrome camera. So here is the Flat Wizard, and I'll be doing things again kind of manually in the Flat Wizard, but this Flat Wizard can actually also be used within a sequence. Let's say you go to, I don't know, the Pleiades in the first target, and you have a rotator in your system. And so you set your framing perfectly with the perfect angle, but then during the same night you want to go to another target, like the Horsehead Nebula, and you set your rotator to another angle, and then after that you want to go to, I don't know, the Rosette Nebula, right? And you get yet another angle. So now you end up with your rig having taken light frames at different angles of rotation. And so theoretically, you need flat frames for each of those angles. You could wait for the night to end to just manually, tell the rotator to go back to each of the respective absolute angles, and then, use the Flat Wizard, which is what we're going to do now. Or you can have an automated flat wizard run at the end of each of your targets within the sequence, so that when you wake up in the morning, you have not only your light frames, but you also have your flat frames for each of your angles and targets, and it makes everything so much easier. So going back to the flat wizard itself, you have some parameters like the name of the target if you want to have like different names for different sets of flat frames that you are taking. For instance, you could put the rotation angle of your rotator in there and the number of flats to take by the wizard. Typically I like to put 20, again psychological, I'm sure 10 is fine. And it can also take at the same time flat darks, or dark frames for your flat frames, which may be necessary if you're using something like an uncooled camera. But for me, I don't bother with that, so I don't have this. And you have then the options to have like the open the cover for darks. You have a wizard mode, which is dynamic exposure, dynamic brightness, and sky flats. And for me in particular, I have attached to my equipment a specific flat panel that is always ready and available to use. It's a flip-flap kind of RB Focus Excalibur flat panel, and I can adjust the brightness of that flat panel. So I can decide that, hey, I want to take my flats with 1 second exposure long, and I'll just adjust the brightness of my flat panel until it matches the exposure that I want. And one way that you could do this is manually. Again, we could go back to the exposure, and let me quickly add, this is the flat panel controls. I'm going to add the flat panel controls to Nina, and I could turn on the lights of the flat panel. I could set the brightness to some kind of low brightness value, 10 out of 4000. Say set, take a 1 second exposure. Make sure I'm on the right filter. So change to the lumens filter, for instance. Take a 1 second exposure, and then we look at how it looks like, and I look at the histogram, and basically I want a histogram value that's roughly at 30%, so that would be a mean and median around 20,000, because the maximum for my sensor is 64,000 effectively. So I could say like, okay, this is not enough brightness, so I could try to increase to like 15, and set that, and take another exposure once the brightness setting is done. Let's take another exposure. Okay, now it's too bright, so maybe I'll go to 12, set. Okay, it's almost there. Maybe the best value is going to be 13 for my target of 1 second exposure, right? So that's likely the target that I need, is 13. Let's look at the histogram, and yeah, we're exactly where I want it to be. This is the perfect flat frame for my luminance filter. And again, I could do it very manually and go in my loop and save, and then do flat L, something like that, right? So that's possible. And actually, when I use a flat panel where I need to manually adjust with a knob the brightness of the flat panel, I do this first step just to find manually the proper brightness, and then I go back to the flat wizard. But in my case, because I have everything controllable by USB, I don't need to do that. I can just set my wizard mode to be dynamic brightness, which tells Nina, please adjust the brightness of my flat panel until you find a brightness that sets my exposure desires to within what I have in these settings. So I would say dynamic brightness in there. And I would say that my target exposure time here is 1 second. And then my histogram mean target is actually not 50%, which I think is too aggressive by default in Nina, but 30% with a tolerance of 20%. With a tolerance of 10%. So anything in between those two values will work, which means that Nina will probably go for brightness of 12, actually, but we'll see. And before I do that, if I'm using a manual kind of flat panel that I need to put on top of the telescope and make sure it holds there via gravity, I can have Nina slew the target or slew the telescope to point straight above, straight to zenith, so I can plop my flat panel on top of my telescope. but this is not necessary for me, so I'm not doing it. Actually, right now my telescope is under a cover and it's raining outside. So I wouldn't be able to do that, so I will not use this slew to zenith. But you know, by default, you would just keep using dynamic exposure. You can also use sky flats, and that will basically work automatically as well. But for me, in this particular case, I'm going to go for dynamic brightness, and I could say, okay, I want to do it for my luminance filter. The binning, gain, and offset will be the default ones that I have set up in the equipment tab. The minimum flat panel brightness is going to be 0, and I could say like the maximum is going to be the real maximum value of the flat panel, but I know that it's a luminance filter on a fast telescope, so it would never go up that high. I'll just put 1000. It doesn't really make any difference, but it helps Nina find the right level of brightness more quickly. And then my exposure time, 1 second, and then those my target mean of the histogram in there. If you were using dynamic exposure, instead you would have like your flat minimum exposure, which for me would be something like 1 second. Maximum exposure would be 2 seconds, and then I would have the a fixed brightness for my flat panel. But if you don't have a USB controllable flat panel, you wouldn't get this field there. And then Nina would vary the exposure times until it finds an exposure time that fulfills my targets. You can see the difference between those. And then I could just click on play. Here I want 1 second. Click on play and let Nina do its stuff. And we'll see at the bottom what it's doing. It's like setting the brightness to 500, taking an exposure, looking at the histogram, it sees that it's too much, so it lowers the brightness, like halves it every single time until it goes back to a brightness level that seems to make a bit more sense. Now it's already at 31, now it's at 8, and it went to 12, exactly as I predicted, and it's now taking my flat frames. I don't have anything to do. So I can just wait until it's done. Actually, don't really care right now, so I'm just going to stop it. You can see it's taking the flat frames, and the flat frames are at the same time appearing in my Nina folder, the flat wizard there. I have my flats. I have some old ones from April, but I should have the more recent ones in there as well. There they are, 5/29, and actually, yeah, we've taken all of the flats. But you can see that with that, I would need to manually go through each filter, click play, wait, and then go to the next one, click play, wait, and then go to the next one. This is a drag. This is too difficult for me. I need to be more lazy. So we have the multi-mode. So multi-mode is if you have a filter wheel in particular, this is going to be super useful. And you can see I can go to, I can say that, yeah, I want to take flats for every single one of my filters. And I can set my default settings per filter. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to inherit the settings that I have in the single mode. I wish it did, but otherwise I can just say like my exposure time is 1 second for luminance, and then do the same for red, then do the same for green, then do the same for blue, etc. I would need to set up just those values for each and every one of them. Would be nice if I could just like copy in between, but I don't think that's currently possible. And then when I'm ready, I would click on play, and it would do exactly the same thing and just cycle through the filters, find the right brightness from my flat panel for each of the filters, or the right exposure length if you're using like a given brightness of your flat panel, and take those 10, 20 flat frames, and then go to the next filter until it's done, and it's absolute magic. And that is how you would be using this Flat Wizard tab within Nina. It's very powerful. It makes things really easy, especially if you have a monochrome camera. And let's go next to the Sky Atlas and the framing tabs that we have here. And those will be a nice intro because they will very naturally link to the advanced sequencer, which is like the pièce de résistance. It's where really a lot of the Nina magic can happen. So let's go to Sky Atlas. And Sky Atlas, this is something that I introduced already in my previous video. And you can search for specific targets. So Andromeda, there it is, my Andromeda galaxy. And just like I showed in the previous video, we can see there is a a line there that tells us the elevation of that target for my particular site at any given time of the night. And also we have the greenish curve there that tells me where my actual horizon on my balcony is located. So for me, Andromeda will only get above horizon when it's already light outside, because in this season it starts getting bright at like 3 a.m. Thanks, Japan. But yeah, that's one way of looking. You know your target, you just look for it, and you're good with that, right? So that's first way. Maybe let's see, North America. Like if I search for North, there it is, North America Nebula. That one I should be able to start imaging from like 1 a.m. Although it's raining, so I won't be able to image. But you can see this is a better target there. So we have our little preview there. We have the elevation of the target throughout the night, but I can also do some more advanced kind of searching, where I could say, you know, I want to have the target be at least, 30 degrees above the horizon, and I wanted this to be 30 degrees at least between midnight and 2 a.m. That way I have some actual nice imaging time. I could also, set any duration for visible 4, and then click search, and it will find, hopefully, some targets that would fulfill those criteria. And there it is. We have a ton of targets there that were found fulfilling the criteria. They're fairly rare targets, so the preview there is not as beautiful as it could be, but it still gives us an idea of what's going on there. And you could also filter even more via object type, via like the constellation you want it to be in, the distance from the moon in degrees. So if it's like half moon, you want to make sure the target is at least like, 45 degrees away from the moon, so you don't suffer from the moonlight pollution too much, that kind of stuff. And that lets you, and also apparent size, if you're looking for a specific field of view that would work well for your telescope. So it's actually a fairly powerful way of searching for targets that you want to image, although most of the time I'd still be using third-party services like Telescopius, that kind of stuff. Okay, but going back to the North American Nebula there, let's say that I actually want to image that. I could just add the target to sequence using the default central coordinates of that, but more often than not, I would actually set it for the framing assistant. So I'm going to click on Set for Framing Assistant here, and this will immediately move me to the Framing tab. There it is. And what it is doing right now is there's this loading screen there. It's actually downloading a preview of the overall field of view around that particular target from the internet using this Hips to Fits Sky Survey source. And there it is. We have the North American Nebula with how it would look like with the center of the with the coordinates as given by the Sky Atlas. And you can see that my field of view there would not have been great. I probably would go more to something like this. This is a bit more thrilling, isn't it? And if I feel like this preview image is not wide enough for me to really decide, maybe I see like, oh, there's the Pelican Nebula there. I want to see a bit more about what's happening there. I could say that my field of view, I want it to be 4 degrees and load the image again, and I should have a slightly larger field of view in there to really figure out what's happening. And here it is, and you can see it has actually reloaded around the field of view that I have moved around. So you can keep basically panning and scrolling through those images by just like recentering and then loading the image again with whatever field of view you really prefer to figure out exactly what you want to image. So it's a very powerful feature. And you can also double check your parameters about your camera, and those parameters are loaded from the equipment tab here under options. And so that's why I insisted previously that we needed to have the focal length and the pixel size properly set up so that the framing wizard can work really well without any issue. Okay, one of the things that's missing here though is the rotation of your sensor. And if you know the rotation of your sensor because you have a rotating device like a rotator, the CAA from ZW, it will kind of be put there automatically. If you don't know, what you'd want to do is slew the telescope towards this target, roughly. So I would click on slew and center. I'm not doing it right now because my telescope is under cover and it's raining. But you would slew and center, and then you can click on determine rotation from the camera. This would take an image of the area, do some plate solving, which we'll learn later how to actually do and set up properly in Nina to make sure that it all works. So once we have a starry sky, so I can show you that, and then it will determine the rotation of the camera. For me, my camera rotation is actually around 90 degrees. So my field of view actually looks like this. And that's, I know, because I've done it a lot of time. But if you don't know, just slew towards the target, or really any place in the sky that's away from the celestial pole, and then click on determine rotation from camera, and it will figure it out, set it up, and then you never need to really touch it again. So there we go. We have our field of view, and let's say this is exactly the field of view that I want to image. And so my next step would be to add the target to the sequence. And so let's see what happens when I click on this add target to sequence. You see I have the choice between the legacy sequencer, which I have not used in years and I have no longer any idea how it works, or what I would really recommend using, and the only thing I will really teach you about in this video, it's the advanced sequencer. And you can see that we have several kind of templates that are available. We have the deep sky object instruction set, the basic sequence target, and my template LRGB. And I'm going to start maybe with, let's try my template LRGB. And as soon as that happens, we are redirected to the sequencer screen with some very specific settings for an LRGB type of imaging with a monochrome camera. And don't worry about how complex this all seems. We're going to go and look at everything and really understand everything together. It's going to be amazing. But before we do that, let me go back quickly to the framing wizard because we haven't looked at everything yet. And I'll also want to show you a bit about mosaics, right? If you want to take mosaics, you would be doing something like 2 horizontal panels, 2 vertical panels, maybe like even something like this, some crazy field of view like that. And you can also choose the amount of overlap that you would want between your panels. I would always recommend at least at least 15, 20 is a good value. So we have a good value there. And you can see that now we have the list of the mosaic panels that you would need to take to really have all of this field of view in there. Now, I personally don't really like taking mosaics. If I'm going to take a mosaic, I'll just put in a larger sensor on my equipment. I'll just go for a smaller telescope, like this guy here. That way I can take the whole target at once without having to care about a mosaic. I won't have as many details, but then most of the time I would be looking at the overall image rather than zooming in. So that's where I have like a kind of a different philosophy than a lot of people, but I understand that mosaics are fun. So definitely it's something that you can do. And if I want to add every single one of those panels to my sequence, so I take the image of that mosaic of the North American Nebula and the Pelican Nebula in particular throughout the night or multiple nights, I would click on Add Target to Sequence, Sequencer, and just to show how it looks like, I could also do like the basic sequence target as the template instead. And you can see that now it has added in my sequencer all of the panels that we have with a sequence for each panel that we can go ahead later and modify. So that's how you would be using the framing module in there that also will take care of your mosaics. Okay, but with this framing wizard, we've used Hips to Fit Sky Survey there, and that downloads the data from the cloud. What to do if we're completely offline? Well, actually, you don't really need to use Hips to Fit Sky Survey because remember that we downloaded a lot of data of Sky Atlas data, the thing that lets us get all of those images in the Sky Atlas. I put that in my documents, and remember that under the options general here, we set up the framing assistant cache framing assistant cache, which means that actually if I go to back to my framing and I go to another target, let's say M42, and that I haven't loaded the image for yet, and instead of hips to fits sky survey, I use offline sky map, for instance, I can click on load image, and immediately, poof, we don't get anything from the internet. We just load the image from the cache that we have downloaded. So actually, most of the time, it's going to be faster to just select offline sky map rather than the hips to fits sky survey, unless it's been updated for some reason. But really, most of the time, just use the offline sky map and you should be fine. And then everything is just as before. Okay, and so with that, we've understood all of the calibration frames, we've understood the framing wizard, how it's linked to the Sky Atlas, how we can do mosaics and put things into the sequencer. So now is the time to go ahead and check out how this amazing sequencer works and how to make full use of it. So let's go! But before we go in the advanced sequencer, if you have any questions or tips and tricks about Nina, you can leave a comment down below, and a lot of people interact there. It's absolutely amazing, and it also helps the video get more visibility. While you're there, you can like the video, that helps as well. And if you're new to the channel and you like this kind of video about astrophotography, you may consider subscribing, in which case, welcome to the channel. If you want to help even more and you're planning on buying anything from Amazon, Agena, High Point Scientific, etc., if you do so after clicking one of the links that I have down in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. If you want to sponsor this channel directly, actually make these videos possible, and they're a lot of work indeed, you can become a channel member. It's the join button next to the subscribe button, or you can become a Patreon supporter, and the link is down in the description. Some of my Patreon ranks have access to my videos early and without ads. You guys, you know it, you make all of this possible. Thank you so much for your support. With that, let's go into the advanced sequencer. Okay, so we're in Nina and we're back on the framing wizard with the stuff that I want to image. Let's see, it's more like this thing around here, right? The Pelican Nebula, that's my field of view, I like this. Okay, and now I have the option to slew and center, or you can add the target to a sequence. Now, when I click on add target to sequence, you have the legacy sequencer, which I've actually not really used for a few years. And you have the advanced sequencer, and that's the one I really recommend using. You might have some trouble like wrapping your head around it for like the first 10 minutes, but afterwards you'll really get it, and honestly it's absolutely amazing. And in there, there's multiple options. You have like this deep sky object instruction set, basic sequence target, mono sequence, sequence template, and those are in capitals. That's because I have added those manually as my own custom templates. And I've chosen the naming convention simply to put them in capitals. That way I know which are custom and which are the normal ones. And where are they coming from? Well, I can go to the sequencer, click on advanced sequencer here, go to templates, and you can see we have the default base templates. You have a basic setup sequence and a basic sequence startup, and then a basic sequence target. And that's what basically it's suggesting to use. We have my also templates there that are for the proper imaging side of things rather than before a sequence or after a sequence, which are the mono sequence and sequence templates. So this is where this is coming from. So going back to our framing wizard, I could say add to sequence, and I'm going to use one of the default templates, which is what I would highly recommend you start with, which is the basic sequence target. So you can see exactly how things are going to work. So I'm going to add basic sequence target, and you can see immediately we have at the very top something that's very familiar, right? We say that we're going to image the North America Nebula. It's filled in the coordinates from the framing wizard automatically. You can also set a rotation degree if you have like a rotator device. And then we have my custom horizon. We have the altitude of the object, so when it's going to be visible. And we have the dusk and the dawn there, those light areas here. So the x-axis here is the time, the y-axis is the elevation of the target, the green area is my custom horizon, the whitish gray is the normal dusk, civil dusk, and civil dawn. The darker gray is like the astronomical dusk, astronomical dawn, and the black area is proper darkness that we have. So we have all of this information, and then underneath we get to the meat of it, we get to what we are going to be doing. And the first container you'll see, and you'll understand what a container is because we'll really get to it, is this exposure info thing here. And you can just like go through it sequentially for now. So we have some annotations, they're just comments about what this will do. So yeah, we're going to center, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It just gives you information about what the sequence is about. It's just for us humans. When I use this sequence, I know what's going on. And then we have the first instruction that says slew, center, and rotate. So it would just slew to those coordinates, center them via plate solving, and then still via plate solving, match the rotation angle that you want to have here. Simple enough, right? And then the other instruction in there would be to run the autofocus. Okay, that seems fair. So we slew, center, and rotate. Then we do an autofocus to have precise focus, and then we start guiding. Now we're on target, we're centered, so we start the guiding. Okay, cool. So that's like the first three instructions, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And then we would go to the target imaging instructions. And this is another container there. You see this little box there in here, and we have triggers, loop conditions, and instructions. And here we have just a series of triggers, and it basically tells me like, okay, while you are doing your stuff, which is basically the instructions in here, while you're doing your stuff, if you need to do a meridian flip, do a meridian flip. Okay? If you see that the size of the stars in my images have increased by more than 5% consistently within the last 10 subframes that I've taken, then trigger an autofocus. Or if you see that we've changed the filter, trigger an autofocus. So those are just like stuff that Nina will kind of do automatically based on certain conditions, and can be done out of order with the rest of the sequence. And it applies to anything that comes within it. And within it, you can see that we have this box there. I can retract it or expand it. And within this box, we have those trigger defined. And then we have loop conditions that are not defined. Okay, so we're not going to loop this box. And then we have instructions. And within the instructions, we have interesting stuff. And those will be run basically in sequence, one after another, except when they're interrupted by triggers. So here we're going to say, we have one instruction, which is itself a container that says take 20 exposures of 300 second exposures. And that box itself, you can look directly at the instructions. It says switch the filter to whatever. Right now it tells me current filter, so it's not going to change the filter. But I could say like, yeah, switch filter to luminance, for instance. And then take exposure of 300 seconds. It's going to be a light frame, binning 1 to 1. And then the gain is whatever is set at and the offset, whatever is set at the camera level. So we're doing those instructions. And at the same time, within this little box, we have a further trigger that says that we're going to dither after a certain number of exposures. And so then we can see that while Nina is going to switch filter and then take an exposure of 300 seconds, we are going to double check the meridian flip, the autofocus after HFR increase, the autofocus after filter change, and then the dither after exposures. So for instance, if my filter at the very start was my red filter when I started the sequence, it would have run an autofocus here with the red filter. And now that I reached this point, I would be switching to my luminance filter, right? So we changed the filter. So wait a second. We have this trigger there that would be triggered by this change and say like, oops, no, let's run an autofocus. So effectively, after this instruction to switch the filter, we have, boom, autofocus done, and then we'll go to the next instruction, which is to take the exposure. And then we have a further thing in there, which is a loop condition, where we're saying that we're going to loop for 20 iterations. So 20 times we'll be switching to filter luminance, then taking an exposure, then switching to filter luminance, except that it's already at luminance, so we don't do anything here, and then we take an exposure, and then switching to filter luminance, but we don't do anything there because it's already at luminance, then take an exposure, then switch to, you get the picture, right? So we're basically not switching the filter anymore because we're already on luminance, so we're not triggering the autofocus after filter change anymore, and we're just taking a 300-second exposure each time, and we do that 20 times. And every 3 frames, there will be a trigger that comes up and that says like, hey, we need to dither here. So let's say did these instructions once, so we have 1 exposure, twice we have 2 exposure, thrice, 3 times we have 3 exposures, and before it goes back to the loop, the trigger will be triggered and we do a dither first. And then we keep going. And while we're doing that, maybe after 10 exposures, suddenly the conditions to do a meridian flip are met. And so this trigger there, that is in one of the containers. So it takes also effect in there. So it's like all of those triggers at the upper level are inherited by the lower level, effectively. So we would be doing a meridian flip. And then we'd keep going. So triggers are just like basically interruptions based on a set of conditions. Loops are just loops, and there are all sorts of types of loops. And then instructions are just instructions done in sequence, except when we say they're done in parallel, and we'll see that a bit later. Okay, so let's say that I've done my 20 exposures there. What comes next? Well, we still have some instructions left over. We have this instruction at the bottom, which is called a smart exposure. And this smart exposure is basically kind of like a clone of this container, but in a simpler format, where it just says we're going to take 20 exposures of, here it's bugged out, 0 seconds long. No, it should be 300 seconds long, of a light frame with binning 1-to-1, gain is whatever is set in the equipment tab, offset is whatever is set in the equipment tab, and the filter is whatever is currently set, and we dither every 3 frames. Because look at this guy here. This guy here is not in this container. So the dither after 3 exposures does not apply to it. So we would need the dither every 3 frames. That said, this guy here is within that target imaging instructions container. So the meridian flip and the autofocus after HFR increase or filter change also apply. Let's say that we started with a half flux radius, which is a measure of the star size in pixels, of 3 pixels. And after doing all of those exposures, it's at 3.2. Okay, and then after doing like 5 exposures of this smart exposure, it's suddenly at 3.3 or 3.4. Then the autofocus after HFR increase, and then the autofocus could be triggered there as well. So again, it goes back to those triggers being interrupts for whatever instructions are contained within those triggers. So this is all it would do. There's nothing more. And that would be basically the end of the sequence. But we haven't told Nina anything more. So after the end of the sequence, the mount would still be tracking. We're not telling the mount to stop. So that's it, right? And the mount would keep tracking until it reaches a limit and stops there. So if I had launched this and then I wake up in the morning, I would expect to see my telescope basically stopped at my horizon limit, likely because I've already said the meridian flip was triggered in this particular scenario. So we have the scope really pointing low to the horizon or below the horizon, right? That's what I would expect to see. And I'd be like, okay, I need to tell the mount to go home again, and then I can put back my cover, etc. So we'll want a way to make this better. But first, I want to touch upon another point, which is what are those big red warning lights or dots or red circles that we have? That looks important, right? This is just to tell me that under my current configuration, these steps will have issues. And why would they have issues? It's because in my current instance of Nina, I haven't connected anything. So I should connect everything. I could connect one by one, just like we did earlier, or I can just use this single button to connect all of the device at once. And you can see it's doing everything. It's launching PhD2. It connected to the guider, the flat panel, the focuser, telescope, camera, and everything is connected. So I can go back to my sequencer and look now, most of those red warning lights are not there, except one slew, center, and rotate instruction still has this issue because if I hover, you can see the reason. The rotator is not connected. So I'm going to have some issues with that particular instruction, right? So slew, center, and rotate, not so good for me. So I have on the left-hand side a list of instructions that I can use. And it's a massive list, and I have some plugins installed that actually add more instructions. And that's all of the crazy stuff that we're able to do in there. It's an insane amount of stuff that we can do. Let's say that instead of slew, center, and rotate, I just want to slew and center. Let's search for slew in there. And let's see, we have slew and center. That's exactly what I need. So I can drag and drop this. I'll put it here and I'll delete that. Bam! So much better already, right? And let's say that actually I don't want to slew and center first. By default, my home positioner is pointing towards the north celestial pole. So I have access to some stars there. And so because plate solving, like centering the target, relies on the stars being roughly in focus, I might want to do autofocus before slew and center. So I can drag and drop this autofocus above slew and center so that we do the autofocus first thing, then we slew and center, then we start the guiding. And because I've never done guiding for this rig, maybe I should like force the calibration to be on. And by the way, there's one more thing that goes on in there. There's some parameters that are not visible by default. Is like if you click on those three icons there, sometimes called the hamburger menu, you can open that up and you can see that autofocus, we could, if it fails, attempt it multiple times. And if it fails, we can choose whether to continue, abort, skip to end of sequence instructions, or we have other stuff we can do. And we can also decide that I can disable this. So it's still in my sequence instruction set, but we've disabled it. So I can enable it again. So you can have like anything you want to do in there. And we'll get to this reset arrow once we actually run those sequences under the stars. And if I have something complex, for instance, this guy here, I can make a copy of it. And if I make a copy, then we have a second container there that has been added at the bottom. So there's a lot of things that you can do to use this sequencer. But you can see as is, this sequencer will effectively take 40 exposures of 300 seconds with my luminance filter. That's what we've set it up for. And it will do autofocus at the right time. It will do meridian flip at the right time. It will do a dithering every 3 exposures. Although maybe for 300 seconds long exposures, I want to do it every 1 exposure. That's already super cool, right? And but I want to not say like I just exposed for 20 exposures. What are we here? Are we ASI Air users? I'm just kidding. We could instead loop until the target is at a certain altitude. So I could delete that and let's search for some other loop. So I'm going to put like, I'm going to search for loop. And let's see, I could say loop until altitude below something. So I could say, bam, loop until at altitude below. And I will loop until the altitude is below 30 degrees. And it even tells me right now the altitude of your object is minus 9.53 degrees. It's below the horizon. So this would be triggered right away. But this gives you a good idea of, whether the object will be, how long you would be able to image until it reaches this parameter. So here we're like looping until altitude. This, by the way, is the absolute altitude. It doesn't take into account the custom horizon. So I could have something else. I could remove this loop and say loop while altitude above horizon. And I could say like, okay, I want to make sure it's going to be at least 5 degrees above my custom horizon while it's looping. And I could actually have those two conditions together. So loop until altitude is below 30 degrees. And at the same time, loop until the altitude are above the horizon. If one becomes false, if one of those parameters becomes like true, meaning like suddenly the target is at 30 degrees elevation or less, but it's still 5 degrees or more above my custom horizon, we'd stop the loop anyway. So that way I can have multiple conditions in there. We can even have some crazy stuff like loop while the next target is below horizon. And this is from a plugin that I installed called Arbuculum. And I showed that earlier. So this is this guy here. It's installed and it gives me those Arbuculum instructions there. And I could say like next target, once it gets like 5 degrees above my custom horizon, stop imaging this current target and go to the next one. So we can look ahead of time and then decide what to do and how much to image. It's all extremely powerful. But most of the time I use something like loop until altitude below 30 degrees because my horizon, my custom horizon on the west side of me is actually very low. So I don't really have any obstacles on the west side of me, and that's where the targets will go. So I'm more worried about altitude limitations before I start a sequence. And that gets me to something else, which is this sequence start area here and sequence end area. So let me go back to the templates, and in your default templates, you will have basic sequence startup. Let me drag and drop it in there. Bam! And you will have basic sequence end, so I can put that in the end area and drag and drop it. Bam! Let's look at what those guys do. So first, basic sequence startup. We have a very interesting stuff is that we have instructions that are set to run in parallel. And you could create your own from scratch by going to your instructions and have like a parallel instruction set here. Bam! Build your own thing. So it means that everything will happen at the same time. So Nina will cool your camera to minus 10 degrees Celsius and unpark your telescope at the same time. I could also search in my instructions for filter and tell it like, oh, by the way, while you're there, switch to the lumens filter because that's probably the filter that I want to use to do all of my autofocus and plate solving, especially I have filter offsets set up. And you know how I had to connect my equipment until all of those warning signs were removed? Well, maybe there are times when I launch Nina and I forget to connect my equipment, so maybe I want to add like an instructions before all of that stuff here. I could have, this is from a plugin called Connector. So again, if I go to plugins, there's this connector plugin here. I can go to my sequencer and say like, connect all equipment. Bam, let's put that at first. Here we go, connect all equipment. We have it as part of my sequence startup. But I want to put it before all of that happens. So I could even like have an instruction set that will be a sequential instruction set. And within my sequential instruction set, my first instruction will be to connect all of the equipment. And then my second instruction would be this parallel stuff. So this whole block of parallel stuff. There we go. Now we have a nice little real sequence startup. So I could have like my new sequence startup within one block. Except that connecting the equipment takes time, right? So if I connect to the equipment, if I send this command, connect all equipment, and then I try to do that immediately, I might run into issues. So I'm going to wait. And under utility, I have this wait for time span. So I'll put that under connect equipment and say like, let's wait for 30 seconds, because why not? So now we have, Nina will just connect all of the equipment, wait for 30 seconds, then cool the camera, unpark the scope, and switch to the correct filter. And because I also have a flip-flap panel, by the way, I would also want to search for flat, and there you have a flat device thing here. So I want to open my flat panel cover. That way I also open the dust cap. So now it's doing all of those things at once. And that's super powerful. And that is my sequence startup, where I have a mixture, I've built manually a mixture of sequential instructions, so connect all of the equipment and wait, and then perform all of those things at the same time so we don't waste too much time, right? Okay, but wait, that means that I have my all of the stuff, connect equipment, etc., and then I go straight into my sequence. And so Nina would immediately try to run the autofocus, but we're still during the day. So that makes no sense. I need to tell Nina to wait until the target is visible, obviously, right? So let's go to my instructions and say search for wait. And we have here wait for altitude. That's one useful thing. So I want to make sure the target is above 30 degrees. Makes sense to me. I also want to wait until the target is above my custom horizon. So I'm going to put that. Wait until it's above at least 5 degrees above my horizon, right? And I also want to wait until it's actually dark outside, right? So for this particular target, it's going to be dark, right? But it's good to have that just as a matter of principle. So I want to wait for time and source. You can click there and say, we want to wait until astronomical dusk. And I can even add an offset of like 20 minutes. I'm going to wait 20 minutes after darkness to actually start things. So now if I were to start this sequence, it would get everything ready in terms of equipment, and then it would wait until it's suitable to actually do the autofocus, slew and center, start guiding, etc., etc. And I think you're starting to understand why I said Nina is so lazy, because once you have set up all of that, click play, and you can immediately go to bed. You can even use templates to add your targets one by one, like in 2 minutes, click play, and then you don't have to rebuild your sequences every night, that kind of stuff. You can be extremely lazy once you've done the hard work at first. And in my sequences, I actually don't have this smart exposure. I don't need it. I can just keep exposing my 300 seconds exposure. So I can change the description to say like 300 second exposures until altitude too low. Bam, there we go. And that's just with a luminance filter. And that works great if you have a one-shot color camera and you don't have a filter wheel. You'd still likely want to have, as I showed earlier with the flat wizard, to be using a manual filter wheel. If you're manually switching filter between like luminance and HA03 and S203, for instance, kind of stuff. That way you can also put that in the sequence. But in my particular case, I have LRGB and even SHO, right? So what if I want to take, L and then R and then G and then B exposures to have all of my color image? The simplest would be like, my intuition would be like, yeah, let's make a copy of this container. And then I'll say like, okay, now that you've done luminance, let's do red. Can you see what the problem with that is? The problem with that is simply that this luminance filter will take exposures until the altitude is too low. So once this is done, it goes to here, and here it just looks at the altitude and says like, hey, you're below the horizon now, so I'm not going to do that. And I would end up with just luminance exposures. That doesn't work. So I need to do something else. I remove that, and I can instead, I'm going to copy my luminance filter and the tech exposure. I'm going to copy those two and keep copying because I want to have everything for LRGB. Okay, I have too many steps there, but I could say switch filter to luminance, then take a 300 second exposure, then switch filter to red, then take a 3 seconds exposures, then switch filter to green, and again take that exposure, and then switch filter to blue, and again take that exposure, and that's it. Okay, so now we would be ready. Can you see what the problem is now? The problem is that we are taking one exposure of luminance, then one exposure of red, one exposure of green, and one exposure of blue. Each time, we're switching the filter. So each time, because of this little guy here, we'd be triggering an autofocus. But we don't want to do that. Fortunately, if we've set up our filter offsets, so if I go back to autofocus here and we have those focus offsets. Let's say they're all properly set up so that Nina knows where the relative focus point of each filter is in relation to another. We don't need to autofocus in between filters, assuming you also have proper backlash setup, but we'll do that once we're under the stars. So that means that I could absolutely use that and just disable this guy here. So we're not going to do autofocus after filter change. We're just going to go sequentially luminance red, green, blue, luminance red, green, blue, luminance red, green, blue until the target is too low. So that's one way of doing things. But there's other ways we can do something very similar. Let's say I don't want to take as much RGB data as I take luminance data, because luminance data is where the juicy stuff is at. It's where we get all of the details. I want to take twice more luminance than I want to take RG and B, maybe not combined, but each. So let's do that. We could just delete all of that stuff. So one of the ways, then, once we've removed all of those exposures, there's something else. There's like a take many exposures. So I can actually, let me go back and add the switch filter, because we still need that, and say, okay, we're going to switch filter to luminance, and then we're going to look for exposures again, and we're going to take many exposures instead of just one. And I could say, like, let's take 3, or let's say, yeah, 3 luminance filter exposures of 300 seconds long. Okay, then we switch the filter. So I'm going to make a copy, switch filter to red, and this time we only take 1 exposure of 300 seconds, or whatever the time is appropriate. So now it's all working out well, because we're going to get 3 luminance, followed by 1 red, followed by 1 green, followed by 1 blue. I mean, if I added green and blue, right? And then go back to 3 luminance exposures. So I'm having like a proper ratio of exposures as I want it. And we'll still dither after each exposure. We'll still loop until the altitude is below a certain altitude, that kind of stuff. So that's very powerful. And if I didn't have any filter offsets, for instance, I could choose to re-enable the autofocus after filter change and use this take many exposures instructions here to say, like, okay, we're going to take first 12 exposures of luminance, then 6 exposures of red, 6 exposure of green, 6 exposure of blue, and we'll still do autofocus after each filter change, because then we have a good amount of time in between filters, and so we're not losing too much exposure time by doing this autofocus after filter change. So that's the difficulty of the advanced sequencer, is that you do need to think about all of the triggers that are being applied and all of the loop conditions that are being applied to your sequence. It can get a bit crazy if you have loop conditions here as well as there. And now you need to think about it even more, because you have loops within loops. Technically, a take many exposure is in itself a loop. So yeah, it's like, it can get a bit like crazy if you do things in a complex way. But the default template really arranges it in a way that things are simple to understand, and there's not too much to think about. And by the way, if you wanted to get even more simpler, I could take those triggers, those 3 triggers, put them there, and then remove this particular set of instructions, because this box here, this level above the 300-second exposure is doing nothing except give us triggers. So it's a kind of useless, but if it works, I'm not going to change it. Okay, so now why do I have this connect all equipment? I'm going to remove that. Now we go to the basic sequence end. And basic sequence end is the counterpart to the basic sequence startup. And we can see that the default instructions are to warm the camera and to park the scope. And then also we can run an external script if we want to, because yes, you can create your own super advanced scripts for Nina and run them, but this is going far beyond this tutorial, so I'm going to remove the script part. Now we have again a parallel sequence of instructions where we warm the camera, we park the scope, and actually for me, And for something like the ZWAM5, for instance, even I think the WD20, they don't really like being parked. I think the AM5 has a weird parking behavior for me. So instead of park, I tell it to go home. So I can search for home in my instructions, and I can say find home instead of park scope. So warm the camera, find home. I also want to close the flat panel. So I can, flat panel, where's my flat panel cover? I'm going to close it. Close the flat panel cover. And then I can also disconnect all of the equipment. So I'm going to search for disconnect. Yeah, disconnect all equipment. And do you see what the issue is? I think you do. It's that now all of these instructions they're run in parallel. So if I'm trying to disconnect the equipment while I'm telling the telescope to go home and while I'm closing the flat panel cover, which one will be faster? Will I have disconnected the equipment by the time I'm trying to close the flat panel cover? We have a conflict there, so we need to be careful, and this disconnect all of equipment should be underneath here. There we go. I might even want to be careful and just add a wait for a certain time span, which is here, drag and drop it here and say we're going to wait 30 seconds after we've done all of that to make sure we're properly home. Everything is closed, everything is done, we're happy, and then we disconnect all of the equipment. So you can see I'm really starting to create my stuff really well. And by the way, if I had multiple targets, let's say I add another target, M31 doesn't make sense, but I'm going to add just M31, add target to sequence, and select my basic sequence targets. You can see that now we have the North American Nebula first, and then we have M31. And because I'm using the old template, it still has this warning on the rotation. But whatever, it's just for example. I could add something else there that says, I'm going to search for flat again, and search for auto brightness flat. I would say that after this loop is done, so we have the loop going on here, I want to do an auto brightness flat exposure. I want to take my flat frames automatically because I have a flip-flap panel. And of course, before that, I would need to close the flat panel cover and then open the flat panel cover. But you can see, I can say like, hey, take 20 flat exposures with the maximum flat panel brightness of 100. My histogram target would be 30%, just like we did earlier. And my target exposure time is 1 second. And I would need to also keep the flat panel closed, otherwise it would reopen because we need to do it for multiple filters in my case, right? So I need to add some switch filter to, let's say, luminance. And then I'm going to make a copy of that switch filter to red, and then make a copy of the auto flat panel. Bam, there we go. So we have luminance, take your flats, then red, take your flats, and then I can add green and blue, take the flats automatically, and I can add that after each target. And to make things easy to copy in between, I should create an instructions container. So I'm going to search for instruction, say sequential instruction set, add it here, move all of that stuff in the underneath, pam, 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 and pam. There we go. And now I can make a copy of that whole container and also put it small and drag and drop it. I'll first drag and drop it here, and then now I'm ready to put it at the very end of the next target as well, so that I can take my flat frames every single time, which, as I said earlier in the video, is important if you have a rotator. Then you can, at the end of each target, have your flat frames ready for that particular target, and that's all, in my opinion, pretty amazing. And that was a lot of work, wasn't it? So it would be nice if we could save templates, and you know it, I've already shown you, you can save templates. How do you do it? You first set a name onto your container. That's one of the reasons I created the sequential container at the start, even though it didn't look like I needed to do so. And you drag and drop it into your templates. And bam, I have my new sequence startup here. That's super cool. Then I have my template for my targets, let's say I've completely done it, I've added LRGB, maybe some hydrogen alpha, whatever, and then same, I have like all of the flats for my flat wizard. This is the template that I like, so I will say like, I'll name it my awesome incomplete, because I haven't done everything, templates, bam, and I can add it in there. And I can do the same thing for the end templates, and they like my awesome end. That sounds ominous. There we go. And now we have all of those templates that are available. So if I go back to like the Sky Atlas and say add target to sequence, sequencer, what do we have here? We have my awesome incomplete template. And so I can select that, and bam, M31, and it's added a second time, but with my awesome template, which includes those filters and the flat wizard, because we've created all of that. And that, my friends, is the advanced sequencer. It can get quite a while to wrap your head around, but if you don't need to do complex stuff, especially if you're doing one-shot color, the default template will work amazingly well. So I can delete everything from the sequence, bam. Go back to my framing wizard, go to add target to sequence, sequencer, and select the basic sequence target that comes with the sequence. All I would need to do, or comes with the Nina install, all I would need to do is add basic sequence startup, and that's probably enough for me. Put basic sequence end, and that's probably going to be enough for me. And only thing is I don't really need the smart exposure. I would just select the number of frames that I want to take with my one-shot color camera. Let's say I want to take 100 frames of 60 seconds each. And I can set filter to current because I have a filter drawer if it's a one-shot color camera. And because I'm taking 60-second exposures, maybe I want to dither every 5 minutes instead. And then the only thing is I don't have a rotator for me, so I would just need to replace this slew, center, and rotate by searching for slew and center. There we go. Put autofocus above. Save this as a sequence template, bam, with a proper name. Here it's going to be named North America, whatever. And you can reuse that as many times as you like. It's ready for you to go. That's the only stuff you need to do to have a basic sequence within the advanced sequencer. It's 60 seconds of work. And then you can reuse that again and again until you want to go even more advanced with all of the stuff that I've done for monochrome cameras right now in there. It's some awesome stuff. And if you have a template that you no longer want to use, you can drag and drop it to the trash icon here. It's a very macOS-like experience. And I'm going to say yes. And North America Nebula, I don't really need it either. I'm going to remove that, etc. And as you've seen, plugins add a lot of instructions to the advanced sequencer. If you want to get your head to explode, you can use a plugin that is called Power Ups. But that is going to really make your head explode unless you're really used to the advanced sequencer. So this is this plugin, Sequencer Power Ups. If you have it installed within the sequencer, you'll see that you have this Enhanced Instructions Power Ups. And that's for instructions. And you also have Power Ups Expressions, Power Ups Functions, Power Ups Meridian Flip, Power Ups Miscellaneous, Power-ups, safety. You have all sorts of crazy stuff in there, and you can create variables. Like I can say, oh, I have a global variable, says we're going to define a global variable. It's going to be a dither frequency for narrowband NB, and it's going to be set to a value of 1 because I want to dither every frame. And then I also want to have like a dither frequency broadband, and the value will be 5 because I typically take 60-second exposures for broadband, so I want to dither every 5 frames instead. And then in the dither after exposures, instead of using dither after exposures, I'm going to use the Power-Ups dither after exposures plus. Put that in there, and now I can tell it in here which of my variables to use by setting the variable name in there. This gets completely insane, but you can see that by that time, we're basically programming. We're programming a sequence. We're effectively writing code, but we're just using a graphical user interface to write code. It gets crazy, but you can see that if you're an advanced user, this can add absolutely insane stuff to your sequences. You can do literally anything. Okay, so now I think you understand a bit more the advanced sequencer in Nina, and more importantly, I think you understand how to modify the basic templates to just fulfill your needs in just like 20-30 seconds, and how to make use of it to make it more and more powerful to suit your needs more and more. I think it's an amazing, amazing piece of tech, and I absolutely love using that thing. But let me know down in the comments if you have any questions or if you don't understand something. Like the video while you're at it, you know. And if you're planning on buying anything from Agena, High Point, First Light Optics, Amazon, etc., if you do so after clicking one of the links down in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. You can also sponsor the channel directly by becoming a channel member or a Patreon supporter. The link is down in the description. But anyway, that leads us towards the next part, which will require a starry sky. So yeah, we'll do the test under the stars of first setting up the proper parameters for autofocus, for auto guiding, for meridian flip, and then testing out as well a sequence that we build in the advanced sequencer. So all of that in the next part.